Nice.
Uh-oh.
There we go.
Beautiful. So Isabel, I'll do a quick introduction, and then who on your team am I turning it over to? Mitchell?
Mitchell. Yep.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. We made it. We are here for our 5th in a series of 5 presentations looking at Dr. King's philosophies of nonviolence and applying them to our work today, to what's going on in the world today, to the work that our wonderful public allies and Prevention Corps, AmeriCorps members are doing in communities. We have a team of 6 wonderful folks who worked really hard to prepare an interactive workshop today for you. So if you are with us, welcome, and please bring your lunch, do what you got to do, but also be ready to engage in the content that they prepared. Without further ado, I will introduce, again, 6 folks. 3 are Prevention Corps members, Isabella, Victoria, and Hannah, and 3 of our public allies, Mitchell, Nina, and Jessica, who worked together to look at Dr. King's philosophies of nonviolence and how they are relevant right now in looking at the critical issue of police brutality. With that, I will turn it over to Mitchell.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are doing well today. So like our presenter said, we are doing Dr. King's nonviolence principles. So since there are 6 of us in the group, we each chose one nonviolent principle. We each will go over the principles, and then as we go over them, you guys will have a shield activity to complete. So after each principle is presented, we'll give you guys about 1 minute to take some time and draw in your shield a symbol that represents the philosophy that we just went over. And then after we complete the 6 principles, we're going to have a small debate that relate to the principles of nonviolence in the current police brutality situation in America. There'll be 2 sides, the pros and cons of this nonviolent strategy. The pro side will take a look at the benefits of nonviolence, and then the con side will look at going against the human nature of defending ourselves. So from there, once we have concluded with that, we will decide a winner. So overall, to give a summary, this image above is from 1965 when Dr. King led a march for voting rights. This 54-mile march stretched from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. And to Dr. King, nonviolence was more than a catchphrase. He deeply believed in these principles. He believed in the philosophy, and it influenced everything that he did. He studied these principles from Gandhi, and he applied them to the civil rights movement. When he was met with resistance from others saying that nonviolence was not the correct strategy, King deep down knew that this was the best strategy because he followed through with it.
So as Mitchell mentioned, we have a police brutality survey. So as we go forward and examine each principle of Martin Luther King's philosophy of nonviolence, we want you all to just consider how you can apply each of these principles to the current police brutality situation in America. I already dropped the survey in the chat, so if anyone didn't get a chance to complete it, just put that in the chat and I'll re-add the survey link in. And Nina will review the results from the police brutality survey later on. We also have another activity prepared, a shield activity. If you didn't have time to print out the shield document, that's totally fine. You can literally just draw out a basic shield. Just make sure you divide the inside of the shield into 6 quadrants, as each quadrant will represent one of the principles. So after we present each principle, we'll just ask that everyone takes a minute just to draw a symbol in one of those quadrants for that principle. And with that, I will pass it to Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I also just sent a copy of the Nonviolent Shield template into the chat as well. So if you want to use that as a reference or quickly print that out, you can go ahead and do that. But before I go ahead and start the first principle, I just want to make sure that everyone takes a few moments to click on the SurveyMonkey link, because without completing that survey, we won't be able to come back afterwards and review the results. We need your participation. So I don't want to jump into the first principle right away. I do want to give you 1 minute to just quickly complete that survey now. So I'm going to start to time you, and I will begin my portion at 12:41. And I'm resending the survey link right now for everyone who just arrived. All right, you guys can also continue to work on the survey as I go ahead and explain the first principle. I all know that you're all very good at multitasking, as we all have had to be recently, especially during the pandemic. So I will let you multitask as I talk about principle number 1. So Martin Luther King Jr. had 6 principles of nonviolence. The first one is that nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, and it is an active nonviolent resistance to evil. The first thing, it must be emphasized that nonviolent resistance is not a method for cowards. It does resist. And this means that if one uses this method because one is afraid or doesn't have the instruments of violence, then that person is not truly nonviolent. There's always a way of nonviolent resistance. And in fact, it speaks more to the fact that someone who continues to uphold nonviolence, even in the face of violence, it represents that that person is ultimately a stronger person. It requires determination. It requires resilience. It requires internal strength. And it's something that can often be confused by this phrase. Violence can often be confused with the phrase passive resistance, but that phrase passive resistance often gives the false impression that it's sort of a do nothing method in which the resistor quietly and passively accepts evil, but nothing is further from the truth. The nonviolent resistor is passive in the sense that he or she is not physically aggressive towards the opponent, but that person's mind and emotions are always active, constantly seeking to persuade the opponent that he or she is wrong and that there is a better way to approach things. And so what I like to think of it is, even though the method is passive physically, it is active and strongly active spiritually. It requires upholding good morals, good values, good principles. It's not passive non-resistance to evil. It's active non-violent resistance to evil. So on that note, that is a summary of my first slide. If we could go on to the next slide, I have a real life example where this principle number 1 of the fact that it relates to courageous people and shows inner strength. I have a real life example using the Little Rock 9. And the Little Rock 9 were the first African-American students to attend or attempt to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was a group of 9 Black students who enrolled at a formerly all-white school. And their attendance at the school was a test of the Brown versus Board of Education, which was a landmark 1954 Supreme Court ruling that declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. On September 4th, 1957, the first day of classes, the 9 Black students attempted to enter the high school, and they were met with enormous amounts of hatred. I mean, you can even just see this in the photo. If you see the woman screaming in the background or the 2 women glaring on the side, you can see just the hatred in these people's faces and tones, and it's just appalling. I mean, imagine showing up on your first day of school and not only being greeted by an angry mob in the National Guard, but the angry mob is shouting obscenities, they're throwing objects, they're threatening violence, they're threatening to kill these students. There is a lot of anger and violence that was happening, and in response to all of these violence, these 9 students, they didn't retaliate. They were steadfast and they were strong, and they held to their nonviolent principles, and they continued and attempted every day from September 4th until September 29th to enter the school. And every day they were attacked, and every day they just held strong, and they maintained their composure, and they maintained their, what's the word I'm looking for? Their quietness and their active non-violent resistance by just walking peacefully to school, until eventually that they were allowed into school with the assistance from the president, who was urged by Martin Luther King Jr. To remain nonviolent at this time. And you can see his quotes at the bottom of the page. So King was actively involved in helping to ensure that this this event stayed nonviolence and stayed true to his principles. And so on that note, what I'm going to have you do now that I've discussed the first principle, and again, just to reiterate, the first principle is the fact that practicing nonviolence takes strength and resolve. It's not a pathway for those who seek to avoid conflict. There's nothing passive about it. So thinking about the fact that it takes strength, it's not a way for cowards, I want you to go ahead and take 1 minute to quickly draw a symbol in a shield or a square that is divided into 6 quadrants that represents this first principle of nonviolent violence, excuse me.
I'll give you guys about another 30 seconds to finish up drawing your first symbol, and then I'll go over the second principle.
And I can just quickly show you, I mean, this is my shield. It's really rudimentary, and you just go ahead and draw one quick symbol that comes to your mind.
I hope you guys are finishing up your first symbol, and I'll begin with the second nonviolent principle. So nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. The end result of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation. The purpose of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. So this essentially means that when 2 people or parties are in opposition of one another, nonviolence allows them to put themselves in the other person's shoes and gain a different perspective and a different sign of understanding. Once these differences are able to be understood and accepted, a beloved community can begin to take place. And I found a wonderful example for this. You can start to the next slide. Yeah. So the Delano grape strike and boycott, I found a little short video that's going to explain this principle.
Mark Twain is now thought of as America's.
So I'll give you guys now 1 minute to complete your shield. Just as a summary, the second nonviolence principle is nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. So just take a minute and think of a quick symbol that you can place in your shield that represents this principle.
Thank you, Mitchell. With that, I'm going to move on to our third principle, sorry.
All right, so I have the third principle, which nonviolence seeks to defeat injustice rather than the people. So it recognizes that evildoers are also victims. So this approach helps analyze the fundamental conditions, policies, and practices of the conflict rather than reacting to one's opponents or their personalities. And overall, it aims to defeat the systems of oppression that exists in our society and our culture, rather than the people who perpetrate or participate in those systems. So that's really important. It's just kind of going back to the principles we've reviewed so far is kind of just valuing dignity and respect of other people, and yeah, just not being aggressive, but passive and still strong in your stance. So this is a short video on the singing revolution.
It was an extraordinary show of mass defiance in the Baltic region of the Soviet Union.
Whenever you give free speech to people, then things get out of hand.
This singing together, this was our power.
If 20,000 people start to sing one song, then you just cannot shut them up. It's impossible.
What role can singing play when a nation is faced with annihilation by its neighbors? Can culture hold a people together? The small country of Estonia has faced these questions.
I think that to have freedom through singing was the most important thing maybe in my life.
This is the story of how culture saved a nation.
So just some background about that video, just in case you haven't heard of it before. It's basically about the Baltic states, which are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. They were incorporated into the Soviet Union after World War II. And then when the Soviet Union's economy began to fail in the mid-1980s, Estonia used the opportunity to sow seeds of a peaceful revolution. So Estonia, followed by Latvia, and then Lithuania began to organize mass protests in which people would sing national or religious songs that had been forbidden by the USSR. And even after events such as Bloody Sunday on January 13th of 1991, instead of fighting back physically or aggressively, people linked arms in a massive human chain and sang in defiance. And singing continued throughout the summer. And by August of 1991, all three nations were recognized as independent by the world and joined the United Nations. And people understood that other people, even the Soviet soldiers themselves, were not the enemy and that oppression was. And again, going back to our first principle, it's also important that we notice that nonviolence is important, but it's not passive. So these people still were very strong in what they did. So I think that's also an important thing to touch upon as well. So yeah, if you guys want to draw something on the third kind of quadrant, or not quadrant, but section of your slide, and then we can go forward with the next principle.
Victoria, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Just for my sake, will you just give me the title of this principle again?
Oh, it seeks to defeat the systems, not the evildoers. So not the people, but the systems.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So as you guys are wrapping up that third symbol, I'll begin discussing the fourth principle of nonviolence, which is that nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform people and societies. This means that nonviolence means no retaliation in the face of violence. Unearned suffering for a cause is redemptive in nature, and violence, it's important to note that violence is often used as a tactic against movements to incite retaliation, which in turn weakens the movement as a whole. A quote from Martin Luther King, paraphrasing Mahatma Gandhi, is, "We will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. We will not hate you, but we cannot in all good conscience obey your unjust laws. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our communities and drag us out on some wayside road, beating us and leaving us half dead, and we will still love you. But we will soon wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And in winning our freedom, we will so appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you in the process." And that guy up there is Nelson Mandela, who was very active in ending South African apartheid, which is my example of the fourth principle. So after the 1990s, so apartheid was the system of very strict and violently enforced racial segregation in South Africa, which began with Dutch colonization and didn't end until 1994. So violent and nonviolent protests began in the 1920s, but after a 1977 military crackdown on nonviolent protests, non-white organizers advocated for boycotts of white-owned businesses and general labor strikes throughout the 1980s. This put pressure on the national economy. Marches to white-only beaches and non-white people seeking medical treatment at white-only hospitals, and marching while wearing colors and kneeling, picnicking at white-only lakes and beaches, and singing and dancing were only some examples of the peaceful ways that attention was drawn to the cause. This culminated in the Defiance Campaign marches of 1989 throughout the country. This brought international attention and pressure from the United Nations, as well as many celebrities. And negotiations to end apartheid began in 1990. An agreement of terms was finally reached on April 27th of 1994. That is a picture of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, who were the two most famous active people in the movement. And according to the American theologian Walter Wink, it was probably the largest grassroots eruption of diverse nonviolent strategies in a single struggle in human history. And in the end, it was the paradox of the regime being both extraordinarily powerful and highly vulnerable that gave nonviolent resistance to its power. Right? So if you think about it, these people were both actively resisting the control that had been put over them, but in such a peaceful way that any physical retaliation makes the other side look 1,000 times worse. And over on the other side, you can see that only a few of the many organized strategies used, protests, marches, sit-ins, boycotts, memorials, candlelight vigils, music and dancing, artist exhibitions. They burnt flags, they wore colored clothing, they negotiated with the government and worked on racial bridge building. Also, people of color refused to serve in the military, and hunger strikes were used by political prisoners. And with that, I will give everybody a minute to think about it and draw a symbol in your shield that represents the fourth principle, that nonviolence holds that suffering can educate and transform people and societies.
So while everyone finishes drawing their fourth symbol, I'm going to get started on the fifth principle of nonviolence, which is nonviolence chooses love instead of hate. Nonviolence resistance avoids external physical violence as well as internal violence of the spirit. Nonviolent resistors not only refuse to shoot his opponent, but they also refuse to hate him. The resistors should be motivated by love in the sense of the Greek word agape, which means understanding or redeeming goodwill for all men. Nonviolence resists violence of the spirit as well as the body. Nonviolence love is active, not passive. Nonviolence love does not sink to the level of the hater. Love restores community and resists injustice, and nonviolence recognizes the fact that all life is interrelated. A quote from Martin Luther King was, "I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear." So this is Daryl Davis, and he strongly believed that love conquers hate. Daryl Davis was a man of color who went out of his way to befriend a member of the KKK. His name was Roger Kelly. Davis spent 30 years building their friendship and forming trust with Kelly, and they went as far to enter each other's homes and lives, and Daryl even attended several of the Klan rallies as one of Kelly's guests. So Daryl didn't hate Kelly because Kelly hated him. Instead, he listened to him, and eventually Kelly began to listen to Davis. In the end, Kelly cut his ties with the KKK, and through choosing love instead of hate, Davis has seen over 200 Klan members walk away from the KKK. Davis is a world changer, replacing hate with love because love conquers hate every time. Now I ask everyone to take a minute, to draw a symbol for the fifth principle, which is nonviolence chooses love instead of hate.
Thank you, Hannah. As you all finish drawing your symbol, I'm going to get started on the sixth principle. So the sixth principle is nonviolence believes that the universe is on the side of justice. So the nonviolent resistor must have a deep faith in the future. And this is stemming from the conviction that the universe is on the side of justice. So as much injustice as there is in the world, and we've seen a lot of it, especially this year, Dr. King, and in fact, anyone that has ever worked for justice and liberation had a deep faith in this principle. And although we're not there yet, and it won't be an easy road, those that continue to work for change must always hold on to this faith. In the speech that Dr. King gave the night before his assassination, he said, "I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land." So it's this powerful belief that the universe is ultimately on the side of justice that continues to drive this faith that leads us to continue his legacy. So I read an interesting article as I was researching and looking into this principle, and I thought you guys would all find this to be a unique take on the sixth principle. The term karma came up a lot when I researched this principle. So karma at its core really comes down to cause and effect. So every action has an equal reaction. So if you kind of analyze this principle from this karma perspective, you can see that a huge problem in our society is that we invest so much in violence, wars, prison, even violent forms of entertainment. So if we analyze this principle from this karma perspective, we know that Dr. King would have wanted us to invest in peace and invest in justice. So if we could invest more time, more resources, and more action into peace and justice, we'll ultimately returns. So obviously faith comes up in this principle. The more traditional definition of faith is a strong belief in God or in the doctrine of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. So if you kind of just remove that religious aspect of faith, that just comes down to a complete trust or confidence in someone or something. And I think this principle is especially powerful because where there is hope, there is faith. So with that, I am just going to go on to Dr. King's 6 bonus principles. So King came up with these bonus principles to assist his followers in continuing the pathway of nonviolence. So the first principle is gather information. So learn as much as you can about the problems around you and talk to those directly impacted. We need to do our homework and learn everything we can about the issues, problems, or injustice so we can become experts on this topic. Once we become experts, it's our duty to educate those around us and do our best to inform everyone, including the opposition, about the issues at hand. We need to remain committed. You know, there's going to be obstacles and blowbacks along the way, but we need to continue to engage. Peaceful negotiations, talking to both sides, using humor, grace, and intelligence to foster solutions between the oppressed and the oppressors, and taking direct action peacefully. So we kind of saw this with the third principle in the singing revolution and reconciliation. So in the end, we want to try and reconcile with our opponents and even to become their friends. And Nina covered this through her principle, as Nelson Mandela demonstrated in ending the South African apartheid. And again, I just think this principle is so powerful because the civil rights leaders were able to envision peace and justice for themselves, for their family, their children, and future generations. And I believe that we should continue to hold the same faith in the future that we envision for our children and our future. I'm going to give everyone just a minute to jot down a symbol for the 6th principle. And if you guys have any questions or reactions or thoughts or comments, this is your time.
I guess a question for you all as presenters. First of all, thank you. All the examples were really helpful in bringing these principles to life. I'm wondering if in your research, which you obviously did quite a bit of, like, was there anything that surprised you or that you didn't know about Dr. King's philosophies?
I was surprised when researching mine about not fighting back when you're personally attacked. I thought that would be a really difficult thing to do, and I still do. I'm not 100% sure that I would be able to not fight back if I were personally being attacked with violence, or if, say, my children were, or something like that. But if you consider it on a larger scale, you know, when people are peacefully protesting and they are met with violence by, say, the military or something, as soon as they fight back, what happens to the media? You know, the media all becomes very negative. It's all about a riot instead of a protest. So it makes sense, but as far as I can see, it might be one of the more difficult of principles to maintain in real time and real life.
I'd like to first say that that was really a great presentation. I loved the change of like media. I also liked the activity and that you guys changed presenters so much. That's like a really cool thing to do. But just while you were going through this, you had me thinking of sort of our circumstances before the presidency changed, which I will skate around that a little bit because I'm a program director of an AmeriCorps program. But principle 2 and I think 5, I feel like are super relevant or were super relevant. And just made me think of my personal life, like having 1 or 2 close friends that were super opposite me politically and not, we didn't ostracize each other. In fact, it was like healthy and good because we had a lot of debates and good conversations. But I just think that those 2 principles are relevant and or still relevant now, considering all that had happened in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I like in doing my research for that, I can kind of see how it is relevant today, because it's always like people are so combative towards the other side, and like when they don't see eye to eye. And obviously there's some viewpoints where people are going to get combative about, but I feel like sometimes we have to take a step back and kind of put ourselves in the other person's shoes and kind of realize their experiences in the life that they've lived shape the way that they think, and they haven't lived our experiences. So just like their lens is going to be different than ours, and sometimes that's just the way it is. But just it's good just to taking the world from their lens, just to kind of get a better understanding, so that we're not always clashing heads. So you kind of have an understanding of they believe this because X, Y, and Z, rather than they're a bad person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Mitchell, in it. I think that's a super important point. And I also think it's healthy for you, anybody, to be able to defend your perspectives in a peaceful way. People shouldn't always agree with you. I don't think it makes life too easy. It makes it easy to kind of like just go with the flow. So I think it's good to get out there and debate, but in a nice, happy way, hopefully.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Would anybody like to share their shield? No pressure, of course. But
And if you don't
anyone
feel
is
comfortable actually sharing your drawings, because I know some people are sensitive about their drawing capabilities, you could just tell us what symbol you chose for a certain principle as well. So for example, for me, for the first principle, I attempted to draw, do you know the emoji arm, the strong arm that goes like this as a representation of strength? And so in my head, it was that little emoji is in the first quadrant, which I thought was very funny because it's very simple. And it's something that you can take with you, an easy symbol to remember to stay true to these 6 principles of nonviolence. And that's just one example.
Great. So with that, I think we should move on to review our survey results.
All right, so I'm gonna review the survey results really quick.
I'm so sorry. All right. I'm just gonna open up.
All right. So the first question, everyone kind of agreed that do you think police brutality is a problem in the United States? So that was kind of unanimous. Everybody said that that was an issue. And again, the same for here. So do you think police brutality has an effect on your community? Everyone also said yes to that. And then do you feel police brutality is racially biased? So this was a little different. So we had the majority of people, about 81 or 82% said that it is, and then about 18 or 2 people said that it wasn't. So there was a bit of a difference in that. Do you believe police brutality can be managed or changed? And it's similar results to the last one. And again, just like we were just talking about, it is, I think it's important to have conversations with people you don't agree with, just to kind of open your mindset and recognize that there are different points of view, and no matter how wrong you might think a person is, you should still consider them as well. All right, I support the Black Lives Matter movement. Everyone said yes. And then the next question, I believe police are adequately punished when they commit a crime. I believe the system is fair. So 2 people said they neither agreed nor disagreed. 3 people disagreed. And about half, or like 50, 54 or 55% said that they strongly disagreed with this statement. So again, that's important to consider, that we have a bit of a difference in opinions on this one as well. And I feel safe around police officers. I feel for my life around police officers. So 5 people said they feel safe around police officers. 1 person said they fear for their life around police officers, and 5 people said that they were unsure. So about half and half with unsure and they feel safe, and then a few people, or 1 person, said that they fear for their life. Again, that's important too, to consider people's kind of differences and experiences in this as well. And then I feel my race or gender influences how I'm treated by the police, and 100% everybody said yes. And then more than 1,000 people died as a result from police harm between 2013 and 2019. I believe most of these were probably justified and or necessary. So 1 person strongly agreed, 3 people disagreed, 5 people strongly disagreed, and 2 people neither agreed nor disagreed. And then the 10th question is, how familiar are you with Dr. King Jr.'s philosophy of nonviolence? 1 person said extreme. I hope if we redid this, more people would say that they're familiar with it, but 1 person said that they were extremely familiar. 3 people said that they were very familiar. 5 people said that they were somewhat familiar, and 2 people said that they were not so familiar. And that is it.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm going to pass it over to Nina. She's going to go over the debate that we have planned.
Before we do that, does anyone have any responses to the survey? I know that it may have brought up some sensitive, it's a sensitive topic, and may have brought up some thoughts and emotions. So just wanted to check in and see your reactions as you were taking the survey, if it spurred anything.
I guess I had a reaction looking at the results, right? Like 100% of folks supporting the movement for Black Lives, and then not 100% of folks seeing police brutality as racially motivated. So that just, to me, like, I guess I would want to have a longer conversation to understand why that difference was there.
Right, and how can we bridge this disconnect?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
So the plan was for us to go forward and do a 15-minute formal debate in which half of you would be assigned to argue in favor of nonviolence in response to police brutality, and the other half of you would argue against that. However, we are running overtime, and so instead, I'm going to ask you all to really take some time this weekend or this afternoon or whenever you have time to think about both sides of that argument. And in thinking about it, the point of this activity was to think about it critically, right? So I want everyone to please mind your P's and Q's, which means your premises and quotients. So when you are dealing with a complex subject, you have to make sure that your points are first factually true, and then also that you're processing them in a logical and valid way, so that the conclusions that we're all coming to actually do make sense, and they're not clouded by emotion, and they're not just appealing to a tradition, and that we're not attacking people instead of arguments. So please, everyone, take some time to think about the way we as a society and as communities react to the problems that we have, especially police brutality, which is a huge issue in America right now. Think about it as clearly as you can to come to a conclusion about how you really feel.
And Nina, you can let me know if you're finished so I can.
I am finished.
Okay, great.
So we're
Wonderful. Thank you to the group for your very comprehensive and interactive workshop today. I know I learned a lot. If you are here and you want to take Nina's invitation to continue reflecting on this over the weekend, take a screenshot. We'll also be able to share out the video to the presentation, and I'm assuming these wonderful slides if the group is willing to share those. And we have about 4 minutes left to take any appreciations either in the chat or verbally for our presenters today.
I just want to appreciate the group for the time that you all took to put this together. It's very clear that you all took this really, really seriously, did a ton of research and put a lot of work into it. So thank you for that. And thank you for making it as interactive as you did. I think especially being the last presentation of the week, it's really nice to kind of engage with the content in a different way and move into the weekend and even past the weekend, just reflecting a bit more. So thank you.
There are appreciations in the chat for the detailed attention to research and such thoughtful and engaging materials. Erica had a great time here, had to head out for the weekend. Cherish also echoing the appreciations. Please check those out in the chat. As I was drawing my freeform shield, I want to thank you for helping me realize it kind of looks like a tulip. Kind of, I'll be holding that in my active nonviolence resistance as we head into sunshine and spring.
I feel like I already said my appreciation, but I'll just say it again. I just really enjoyed the content. I thought it was really well put together. It was engaging. It's hard to do what you just did in an hour and a half. And I think even as a program director and as someone that has to do trainings often, I'm a little like envious of the skill you guys just displayed. So thanks. Thanks for making my weekend harder by making me envious of your ability.
Beautiful. So with that, everyone give yourselves a pat on the back, a hug, whatever you want to do. You did great today. And for the allies and Prevention Corps members in the room who already completed your presentations, same goes for you. We are formally sort of closing this week of 5 amazing workshops that you all came together around on MLK Day of Service and have been working collaboratively since across programs, right? Where you didn't really have relationships and you worked really hard to build those. And so I think you should feel really proud. I know on behalf of all staff, we learned a lot and appreciated you kind of boldly going forward with this challenge that we presented to you. I'll pause and see if any other members of staff, Prevention Corps, Public Allies staff would like to say anything before we adjourn.
I'll just say that I really appreciate the energy and attention that all the groups brought to this task. And I think you did a wonderful job with our inaugural Lunch and Learn series in celebration of Black History Month and MLK Day. So if you have any feedback about this experience working together on these projects, we totally welcome that. So reach out to your program manager.